Yemen's humanitarian crisis is escalating to devastating levels. As the war-torn nation endures a destructive civil war, the United Nations warns up to 13 million civilians are at risk of starvation. This could be the world's worst famine in 100 years.
We want to warn you, some of the images you're about to see are extremely disturbing and might be hard for some of our viewers to watch. Orla Guerin from our partners at the BBC got rare access to Yemen, and she is following the latest from the capital of Sana'a.
Sana'a, inhabited for more than 2,500 years, with a history stained by blood. It has seen many wars. The latest is now threatening millions of Yemeni lives. It rarely hits the headlines. It's one of the hardest places for journalists to reach. We took a risky journey by road. The Saudi-led coalition has stopped civilian flights to the Houthi-controlled north. And in Sana'a, one mother among many, afraid her child will waste away. Motib is 2 years old, a victim of Yemen's growing hunger. In the bed across the way, doctors want us to see another 2-year-old called Bassem. It's hard to look. His grandmother, Nadia, shares his torment. She's skin and bone herself. Bassem was born into the Arab world's poorest nation, but the war has pushed it to the brink. Now the currency has collapsed. Food prices have doubled in a month. Dr. Najla, who trained in Liverpool, says only peace will save Yemen's children.
The final solution for our problem is to stop the war. After that, everything will be okay.
Do you have any hope of that?
Myself, no.
Children die here every day because of malnutrition and other preventable diseases. Victims of man, not of nature. Well, this is where you can really see the tragedy of Yemen. There's ward after ward here of severely malnourished children. Nowhere in the world are more people at risk of starvation. I was here in Sana'a 2 years ago, and it's really shocking to come back and see how much worse things are now. And the United Nations is warning that if the war continues, within months, Yemen could face famine on a massive scale.
I think many of us felt, as we went into the 21st century, that it was unthinkable that we could see a famine like we saw in Ethiopia, that we saw in Bengal, that we saw in parts of the Soviet Union. That was just unacceptable. Many of us had confidence that that would never happen again, and yet the reality is that in Yemen, that is precisely what we are looking at.
I mean, do you think we should be ashamed?
Yes, there's no question. We should be ashamed, and we should, every day that we wake up, renew our commitment to do everything possible to help the people that are suffering and in the conflict.
Those who escape starvation may not escape airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition. Fuad survived one a fortnight ago, only just. He has lost one leg and may lose both arms. He tells us he was in a clinic in Hodeidah treating civilians when it was hit. Fuad is not a fighter, he's a nurse. Staff here say most airstrike victims are civilians like him. They've been keeping a grim count since the war began. We've seen about 800 or 900 injured, says Mohammed Osimi. About 200 to 300 have died. Their burns were very deep, from head to toe. They had no hope of surviving. In the market nearby, a bitter harvest for Yemen. Food that many here can no longer afford. They are trapped between the Houthi forces who control the capital and the Saudi-led coalition, which bombs it. Caught in a civil war, which has become a regional power struggle. People here feel abandoned and wonder why the world has let them suffer for so long. Our message to the international community and the European countries is to look at our situation, this man says. It's getting worse and worse. What have we done wrong to deserve to be besieged? What crime have we committed? Yemen has been called the forgotten war, but more than 3 years on, many here say it is not forgotten. It is ignored. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Sana'a.
So I know those pictures are difficult to watch, but this really sort of reinforces why this sort of reporting is very, very important. This is a man-made crisis that could easily be reversed. And, they are right. It is a war that we don't pay a lot of attention to, particularly here in the West, and it doesn't have to be like this. You know, what Orla said in that reporting, which is the idea that in the 21st century, in 2018, we would be seeing images much like we saw in the 1980s across East Africa, in the Soviet Union, and other parts of the world that were suffering because of the geopolitics of the day. And here we are in 2018, we're talking about children who are starving to death. And we can do something about it. And this country can do something about it. The European Union can do something about it. And the only way that will happen is for the reporting that is happening right now on the ground, not just our partners at BBC, here at CBS, others. Holly Williams has been there. Because I think that ultimately that's exactly what brought a change to Somalia. That's exactly what brought a change to Bosnia when people were suffering there. And so the reporting must continue, but it is shocking to see those images. And I kind of agree with the UN person. We should be ashamed. I was going to say, I also want to give credit to the UN people, the Yemeni people, the doctors, the nurses, that every single day they probably don't get paid very much, if anything at all, and they're really the ones sort of grinding away, trying to sort of bring this story to the forefront. I think it's easy. We just came away from the UN General Assembly. It's easy to go at them to say, look, you guys are bureaucratic and it's a nightmare, and we're spending too much. The United States is spending too much to prop this up. The reason we spend money, the reason we try to fund the United Nations, and the entire reason we created the United Nations is to alleviate the suffering of people like that. Thank you, Orla Guerin. We appreciate your reporting.